Welcome dear learners, I am Ankita Lakra from Department of Commerce. Welcome to this comprehensive lecture on Unit 8. Today we are going to navigate the complex yet fascinating landscape of India's economic regulatory framework. We will begin by examining the historical and functional role of the Foreign Investment Promotion Board, commonly known as the FIPB. From there, we will transition into a practical guide on navigating the Indian business landscape, essential knowledge for any aspiring entrepreneur or policy analyst. Finally, we will conduct a deep dive into the watershed movement of the Indian economy, the industrial policy of 1991. We will analyze why it happened, what it changed, and how it transformed India into the global economic player it is today. Let us begin our exploration of these critical economic structures. Before we delve into the specific modules, let us outline our learning objective for this session. By the end of this lecture, you should be able to first understand the concept, objectives, procedures, and legal terms associated with the Foreign Investment Promotion Board in India. Second, you will be equipped to study and navigate the complex regulatory environment and procedures required to start and run a business in India. Third, we will understand the profound impact of the industry policy of 1991 on the Indian economy, looking at statistical growth and structural changes. And fourth, we will study the specific provisions and the overview of the new industrial policy of 1991, contrasting it with the previous regimes. Let us start by focusing on the Foreign Investment Promotion Board or FIPB. The FIPB was not just a committee, it was a key institutional mechanism established in the wake of the 1991 reforms. Its primary purpose was to promote and facilitate foreign direct investment or FDI into India. Think of the FIPBs as a gatekeeper that evolved into the facilitator. For decades, it was the single window through which foreign investors had to pass to get approval for investing in sectors that were not on the automotive route. However, economic governance is dynamic. In May 2017, the government abolished why to reduce red tape. The responsibility for approving FDI proposal was shifted directly to individual ministries or departments. This move was designed to expedite decision making and further improve the ease of doing business. Even though the FIPB has been abolished, understanding its objective is crucial to understanding India's FDI trajectory. What was it trying to achieve? Its primary objective was to attract and facilitate FDI. It acted as the face of the government to foreign investors. Secondly, it was responsible for reviewing and approving FDI proposal to ensure they aligned with the country's FDI policy. Not every investment is beneficial. The FIPB ensured alignment with national interests. Thirdly, it acted as a coordinator. Bureaucracy often works in silos. The FIPB coordinated with various government departments to ensure projects didn't get stuck in a loop of permissions. Finally, it addressed investor grievances, providing guidance and clarity on complex FDI related issues. Who actually sat at the table of make these decisions? The composition of the FIPB was high level and interministerial. It was chaired by the Secretary of the Department of Economic Affairs within the Ministry of Finance. Other key members included secretaries from the Department of Industrial Policy and Promotion, the Department of Commerce, the Department of Revenue, and the Ministry of External Affairs. This ensured that every aspect from taxes to diplomacy was considered before approving a foreign investment. Regarding the application procedure, prior to 2017, it began with the submission of a proposal on the FIPB portal. The Secretariat would then perform a preliminary scrutiny and circulate the file to relevant ministries for comments. Once comments were received, the board would convene a meeting to decide. Post approval, the applicant had to comply with specific reporting requirements. This structured approach brought a level of predictability to foreign investors. What was the scope of FIPB? It dealt specifically with sectors where government approval was mandatory. It did not deal with the automatic route where no prior approval is needed. When evaluating a proposal, the FIPB used specific methods and criterias. How much capital is coming in? Is transfer of technology? Will this generate employment? And does it contribute to overall economic development? A verbal question for you. Does domestic policy exist in a vacuum? No, it interacts with international treaties. This is where foreign trade agreements or FTAs come into play. The FTAs play a significant role in facilitating FDI inflows by liberalizing trade regimes between partner countries. FTAs provided better market access and investment protection, which in turn enhanced investor confidence. An investor puts money in hoping to eventually take profit out. This brings us to the concept of repatriation. Under the FIPB regime and continuing today, foreign investors are allowed to repatriate or send back their capital investments and the proceeds from the sale of their investments. However, this is not a free for all. It is subject to strict compliances with the Reserve Bank of India guidelines and the Foreign Exchange Management Act or FEMA. For example, to repatriate sale proceeds, an investor needs a no objection certificate from income tax authorities to ensure all local taxes are paid. Similarly, for technical service fees, which are fees paid to foreign companies for providing technical know how, repatriation is permitted, provided applicable taxes are deducted and FEMA regulations are met. We explored it as the transitional mechanism that managed foreign investments from 1991 until its abolition in 2017. We learned its composition was interministerial to ensure holistic decision making. We also discussed that while India welcomes investment, the exit of capital via repatriation is carefully regulated by the RBI and FEMA to ensure economic stability and tax compliances. Moving on, we shift our focus from policy to practice. India is one of the world's fastest growing economies, but for an entrepreneur, the regulatory environment can seem like a web or complex. How does one navigate this? We will look at the life cycle of setting up a project, from incorporating a company to obtaining license, raising finance, and starting operations. The first step is establishing a legal identity. In India, this is governed by the Companies Act 2013. This act replaced the older 1956 Act to modernize corporate governance and simplify procedures. There are three main types of companies you can form. First is private limited company. This requires a minimum of 2 shareholders and is capped at 200. It is ideal for small to medium enterprises because it restricts the right to transfer shares, keeping control within a small group. Second, a public limited company. This requires a minimum of 7 shareholders with no upper limit. These companies can raise money from the public, but they face stricter compliance norms. Third, a one person company. Introduced in 2013, this allows a single entrepreneur to incorporate a company with limited liability, combining the benefits of sole proprietorship with a corporate structure. How does one actually incorporate? It is a digital process involving several acronyms. Step 1, obtain a digital signature certificate for directors as all filings are electronic. Step 2, apply for a director identification number. Step 3, reserve a name using the Reserve Unique Name service on the Ministry of Corporate Affairs portal. Step 4, draft the Memorandum of Association which defines the company's objectives and the Articles of Association which defines internal rules. Step 5, file the SPICE Plus form. This is a composite form that streamlines multiple applications. Step 6, automatically obtain your tax identities, PAN and TAN. Once incorporated, you must maintain compliances through annual audits and filings. Once the company came into existence, you can immediately start manufacturing. Not necessarily. You may need a industrial license under the Industries Development and Regulation Act 1951. Certain sensitive sectors require a mandatory license. These include defense, explosives, hazardous chemicals, and tobacco and alcohol. However, what if your industry is not on this restrictive lists? In that case, you simply file an industrial entrepreneur memorandum with the Department for Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade. This is essentially a notification to the government for your intent to set up a factory. It is filed online and serves as a statistical record for the government to track investment trends. Now that you have the license, you need capital. This brings us to the critical aspects of rising finances. There are two broad categories, equity and debt. Equity financing involves selling ownership. You can do this via private placements to venture capitalists or through an IPO, initial public offering if you go to public. You can also attract foreign direct investments. Debt financing involves borrowing. This can be traditionally bank loans, borrowings from non banking financial companies, or issuing bonds in the market. The government also assists here through schemes like Startup India and Make in India, which provide fiscal incentives and easier compliance norms to attract capital. A critical subset of finance in modern India is venture capital and private equity. These are vital for high growth sectors like technology. Recent trends show a shift. Investors are moving beyond early stage startups to growing stage investments companies that have a proven model and need cash to scale. There are also sectoral diversification. It is not just about software anymore. Money is flowing into fintech, healthcare, and renewable energy. Furthermore, we are seeing better exit strategies, meaning investors are successfully selling their stakes for profit via IPOs, which encourages them to invest more. With capital in the bank, you must start operations. This begins with site selection. You might choose an industrial park which offers ready infrastructure like power. Alternatively, export oriented businesses might choose a special economic zones to enjoy tax holidays and duty free imports. Simultaneously, you must manage human resources. India has a vast talent pool, but recruitment must align with labor laws. Compliances with minimum wages, working hours, and safety standard is non negotiable to avoid legal disputes. Companies must also invest in workforce development to bridge any skill gaps. Operating a business also means being a responsible entity. Environmental clearance are critical. Projects with potential environmental impact must undergo an environmental impact assessment and receive approval from state or central pollution control boards. On the asset side, you must protect your intellectual property. This involves registering patents for inventions, trademarks for brand identity, and copyrights for creative works. In a competitive market like India, neglecting intellectual property or IP can lead to the loss of your competitive edge. Now, let us look at the physical implementation of a project. Land acquisition is often the most complex hurdle. It involves identifying land, complying with the Rehabilitation and Settlement Act of 2013 if displacement is involved, and converting land use, for example, from agricultural to industrial. Once the land is secured, you need buildings permits. These ensure your factory or office adhere to the National Building Code for safety. You also need approvals for utilities like water and electricity. Finally, depending on your sector, you face specific regulations. If you are in food and drug, you answer to the FSSAI or CDSCO. You must adhere to good manufacturing practices. If you are in telecommunication, you need a unified license from the Department of Telecommunications and must secure spectrum through auctions. In renewable energy, while there are incentives, you must secure grid connectivity from the Central Electricity Authority and sign power purchase agreements to sell your electricity. To recap our look at business operations, we walked through the life cycle of an Indian business. We learned that incorporation is digital but legally rigorous. We saw that while licensing is restricted to a few sectors, filing an IEM is standard for others. We explored financing options from IPOs to government schemes and emphasized that operational success depends on strict compliances with labor, environmental, and industry specific laws. We now arrived at the pivot point of the modern Indian economy, the industrial policy of 1991. Before 1991, India was a protectionist economy. In 1991, policy dismantled this, aiming to liberalize, privatize, and globalize. The impact of the industry policy 1991 was profound. Delicensing and deregulation unleashed the private sector. Gross fixed capital formation in the private sector doubled from roughly 10% of GDP in 1990 to over 21% by 2007. Industries like automobiles and telecom, which were once stifled, exploded in growth. The most visible impact was in foreign direct investment. In 1990, FDI was an inadequate at $97 million. By 2020-21, it surged to over $44 billion, opening the doors to foreign institutional investors, also bolstered the stock markets. This policy also integrated India with the world via trade liberalization. Import tariffs were slashed, total trade to GDP ratio rose from 15% to over 42%. Structurally, India leapfrogged from agriculture to services. The services sector, led by IT, grew from contributing nearly 40% of GDP to over 54%. However, a verbal question: did everyone benefit equally? While poverty reduced significantly from 45% to 21%, income inequality measured by the Gini coefficient rose. This growth was spectacular, but the distribution remains a challenge. Let us contextualize this further. To understand 1991, we must look at 1956. The Industrial Policy Resolution of 1956 was about state dominance. It reserved key industries for the public sector, Schedule A, and established the license Raj, where private enterprise was tightly controlled via permits. By 1991, this model was failing. India faced a balance of payments crisis, high inflation, and inefficient public sector units. The government had to pledge gold to secure loans. The IMF demanded structural reforms as a condition for a bailout. This crisis forced the government to abandon the 1956 model and embrace the new industrial policy of 1991. The new industry policy 1991 had distinct objectives: enhanced efficiency, promote competitiveness, and attract foreign technology. Its key elements were revolutionary: liberalization of licensing. It abolished the requirement for licensing for most industry. Disinvestment. It started selling stakes in public sector enterprises to make them efficient. FDI liberalization. It welcomed foreign equity and technology. Export promotion. It shifted focus to export oriented industrialization. Let us detail these reforms further. Abolition of licensing meant the private sector could finally breathe. Entrepreneurs could expand without asking the government for permission every time. Public sector reforms acknowledged that the government shouldn't run businesses that lose money. This led to privatization and professional management of public sector units. Crucially, the policy reformed the MRTP Act, the Monopolies and Restrictive Trade Practices Act. Previously, large companies needed permission to expand to prevent monopolies. The 1991 policy removed these barriers, allowing Indian companies to grow large enough to compete globally. It is also facilitated the inflow of foreign technology, modernizing Indian industries. In conclusion, this unit has taken us on a journey through the regulatory evolution of India. We started with the Foreign Investment Promotion Board, a mechanism that bridged the gap between closed and open economies. We learned the practical steps of navigating the Indian business landscape from incorporation to compliances. Finally, we analyzed the industrial policy of 1991, understanding it not just as a set of rules but as the fundamental shift that unlocked India's economic potential, transitioning it from a license permit Raj to a liberalized, globally integrated economy. Understanding these framework is essential for any graduate or postgraduate student looking to engage with the Indian economy, whether as a policymaker, an investor, or an entrepreneur. Thank you, dear learners, for your attention. I hope you all get insight from this lecture.